Hey guys, today we are doing something new that might look a little bit familiar, but it's a little bit different from what we've been doing before. We're doing adverbs. Now, they kind of look like adjectives, but it's not adjectives, it's adverbs. And you might recognize the word adverb has a word in it. What word does adverb have inside of it? Right, it's the word verb. And that should help us kind of remember what an adverb does. An adjective describes what? Remember, an adjective describes a noun, which is, of course, a person, place, thing, or an idea or feeling. But an adverb, it doesn't describe a noun, it describes a verb. And that word adverb might help us remember a little bit better what it is describing, because it's in the word adverb. So an adverb is describing a verb. What does an adverb describe? Right, it describes a verb. So let's kind of get into our questions a little bit. Now, if you remember when I was talking about adjectives, I said we have our 5 questions. Which one, what kind, how many, how much, whose. Those are the only 5 questions in adjective. You're never going to have to remember any other questions for adjective. It's just those 5. Adverbs, we're going to start off with these questions. I'm not going to add any more questions this year, but later in your school life, maybe like in high school, so it'll be a long time before you have to add any more questions, you might be adding questions. But these 5 right here, just like the adjectives, these are the most used and the most basic adverb questions. I think I might have said adjective earlier on accident, but these are the most commonly used adverb questions. And these are the ones that we need to have memorized. Now today, we're only going to focus on one of them. That's the first one right here, how. And this one is very, very commonly used. Kind of like with my adjective questions, I have which one, or I'm sorry, not which one. With my adjectives, what kind is my most commonly used one, not which one. What kind is very, very much commonly used. Like we have maybe like what kind of activity, a fun activity. What kind of sweater, a blue sweater. What kind of day, a beautiful day. So we have the what kind in our adjectives is very much commonly used. How is kind of like that. It's very, very much used. The other ones are also used a lot, but I feel like how is one of the ones that's like the most basic. So that's why we're starting with it. So these are my 5 adverb questions: how, when, where, how often, to what extent. Now, to what extent is kind of a little bit of a weird one, but I'll kind of give you examples for each one so you at least can have an idea of how they're used. But like I said, we're mostly going to be focusing on this one. So I'm going to skip this one for now since we're going to be focusing on it later. So when, if I have, we went to the store, I might say, when did we go to the store? I might say yesterday. So I could say, yesterday we went to the store. When did we go to the store? Yesterday. Yesterday would be my adverb there. I have where. We went where? To the store. Store, or no, that's a bad one. I might have look over there. Over where? There. There would be my adverb right there because it's answering the question where. We go to church every Sunday. How often? Or no. We always go to church on Sunday. How often? Always. So that would be like how often, how like kind of how that adverb is used. And to what extent? Now this one is kind of takes a little bit of a higher thought, but the best way that I can explain this one is you might say, I'm very hungry. I am to what extent hungry? Like to how much hungry is kind of almost how we would say, but we wouldn't say how much. You would say to what extent is the wording that we would use there. So I'm to what extent hungry? I'm very hungry. So that is kind of how I would be using those questions. And the word how, like I might say, he quietly snuck inside. He snuck inside. How? Quietly. And you might notice this right here at the bottom. On page 156, that's where we're at in our language book right now. On page 156, we're still looking at adverbs, this is the day that we're introducing them. We're looking at adverbs. If you look in the middle of the page, it says look closely, and it says many adverbs end with the suffix ly. Remember, a suffix is just kind of something we add to the end of a word, like ly or ing, like we have jump, jumping, run, running, swim, swimming. So that suffix ing is used mostly for verbs. But this suffix right here is used mostly with adverbs. And if you see ly at the end of a word, it's not a hard and fast rule. Remember, I kind of mentioned yesterday about hard and fast rules. The ly at the end of a word is not a hard and fast rule, but most of the time, when you see ly at the end of a word, it kind of gives you a hint that it probably is an adverb. And you probably will see that when we're going through adverbs in this book. You'll see a lot of ly endings, and that usually means it's an adverb. Not all the time, but most of the time it will be an adverb. So let's take a look in our book at our adverbs, and we're using the question how today as our adverb question. If you look at the top of the page, at the look closely, it says an adverb is a word that describes a verb. I've already mentioned that. Some adverbs tell how the action was done. That pink sentence right there says, when I saw the spider on my foot, I yelled loudly. Now, you see the word yelled is underlined 2 times. Yelled is a verb. I yelled. Who yelled? I yelled. I yelled how? My adverb question. I yelled how? Loudly. And do you also notice the word loudly ends with ly? Okay? And they have underneath that, Dad drove carefully. And do you notice how the word carefully was at the end of the sentence in this example, Dad drove carefully? Could you take the word carefully and put it at the beginning of the sentence? Carefully, Dad drove. Absolutely. So when we're looking for adjectives, and I said adjectives, wasn't a slip up. You remember when we were looking at adjectives, not all the time, but almost all the time, usually our adjectives come right before our nouns that it's describing. Adverbs aren't like that. An adverb can be anywhere in the sentence. It could be right next to the verb it's describing. It could be all the way at the beginning of the sentence, or it could be all the way at the end of the sentence. So adverbs kind of just do their own thing. Adjectives like to stay close to that noun that they're describing, but adverbs are kind of wild. They go wherever they want, but they stay in the same sentence usually. So think A. We're looking at think A. Look at the verb and circle the adverb that tells how the action was done. And it says tells how the action was done, so that tells me I'm going to be using this question right here, how. Draw a small arrow from each adverb you circle to the verb it describes. Now they already have the verbs underlined, and that just like we did with our adjectives when we were doing adjectives, we're circling our adverb and drawing an arrow from our adverb to the word it describes. In this case, it's not going to be a noun, it'll be a verb. And they already did half the work for us. So number 1 is already done for us, so let's take a look at that. Number 1, Nathan played his violin loudly. Played is underlined twice. That's my verb. I could say Nathan played how. Nathan played how. He played loudly. So they circled loudly, drew an arrow from loudly to played. So make sure that's already done in your book, but make sure that we're understanding how we're doing this. Number 2, let's take a look at number 2. The children copied their homework carefully. The children copied their homework carefully. The word copied is underlined 2 times, so I'm going to say copied. Copied how? The children copied how? Not copied what? I already know they're copying their homework. That's not what I'm looking at. The children copied how? They copied carefully. That's how they were doing the copying. So circle the word carefully and draw an arrow from carefully to copied. Make sure you do that. And you notice so far my adverbs have had that ly ending. Again, it's not going to be every single time you see an adverb, but most of the time it will have that ly ending. Number 3, quietly, Edward tiptoed toward his bedroom. Okay, we have the word tiptoed, something that you do, it's a verb underlined twice. And I can say, Edward tiptoed how? Edward tiptoed how? How did he tiptoe? Well, he tiptoed quietly. And do you see how these words could be taken out of the sentence? Nathan played his violin. You didn't need that adverb in there, but when you say loudly, now I know how he's playing that violin. The children copied their homework. That could be a sentence on its own, but when you put the word carefully in there, it tells me how they're doing it. It gives me a better idea and a better picture of how the children are copying their homework. Number 3, I could just say, Edward tiptoed toward his bedroom. But when I say quietly, Edward tiptoed toward his bedroom, now I have a better idea of how he's doing it and the manner of which he's doing it. Because you can tiptoe without being quiet. I've seen it done. But here, Edward is trying to be quiet. Maybe there's a baby sleeping or something. So make sure you circle the word quietly. Draw an arrow from quietly to tiptoed. Number 4 and number 5. I want you to try number 4 and 5 on your own. Pause the video right now. Do number 4 and 5, and we'll do those when we come back. Okay, number 4, you should already have these done by now. Number 4, Mom gently washed my skinned knee. Mom gently washed my skinned knee. Now we have the word washed. How did Mom wash? Did she wash gently? Right, she washed gently. So circle the word gently and draw a line from gently to washed. And at number 5, happily the students played at recess. I have the word played is my verb, students is my subject. And you might notice I'm saying, how did the children copy? How did Edward tiptoe? How did Mom wash? And now I'm saying, how did the children play? I keep using the subject, and that finding that subject and finding that verb is helping me even more to be able to find my adverb using this question, how. So how did the students play? Well, did the students play at recess? They did play at recess, but that's not answering my question, how. What is answering my question, how, when I say, how did the children play? They played happily. That gives me a better idea of how the children were playing, because I'm certain that you know sometimes when we play at recess, it's not happily. Sometimes we might fight and argue with our friends. But in this sentence, the students played at recess. How? Happily. Circle the word happily, draw a line from happily, draw an arrow from happily to played. And something else I wanted to point out in these sentences in Think A, the word loudly, carefully, quietly, gently, happily, they're not all right next to the verb that they're describing. And I know I mentioned it earlier, but when you can see it, it kind of might give you a better understanding of what I mean. So number 4, Mom gently washed my skinned knee. Well, gently is right next to washed. But could I say, Mom washed my skinned knee gently? I could reword it like that, and it would still make sense and be correct, but it would just be moving my adverb. Happily, the students played at recess. Could I say the students happily played at recess? Absolutely. Moving that adverb around doesn't change whether it's an adverb or what word that adverb is describing, as long as it makes sense. But you have to be looking everywhere in the sentence for that adverb, because it could be anywhere. So make sure you're keeping a really good eye on that, because sometimes that can be really tricky. Look at Think B. Again, I wanted to reiterate this ly thing. If you have a word that ends with y already, like they gave the example in the book Happy, we're not going to say Happyly. You're going to change that y to an I, just like we do when we add that EREST, just like we do when we add that ED ending, just like we do when we add ES. Okay, same rule applies here. Change that y to an I and add, well, in this case, we're doing add ly. So if your word again, if the rule applies to this, so that means if it's AY, EY, and OY, we're not going to do it. But any other word that ends with Y, that we need to change the Y to an I and add LY, and make sure we follow that rule very, very carefully. Look at number 1 and think B. They want you to add LY to the end of these words, make it a root word. We have the word easy plus LY. Do you notice the word easy ends with a Y? It does. So we won't put EASYLY. We put EAS and change that Y to an I and add LY. So it'd be EASILY. And make sure any other word that needs to use that rule, make sure we're following it. I'm not going to go through all of Think B, and I'm not going to go through all of Think C. I will go through it really quick, but not through the entire thing. So finish up Think B when we're done with this video, and then I want you to look at Think C very quickly. Think about the question, how? My question up here. Write an adverb for each verb that tells how the action might be done. So I have number 1, run. Run is a verb. So all of these in Think C are verbs. And they want you to say run. Run how? Well, how could someone run? Could someone run quickly? Or maybe slowly? Or maybe clumsily? Okay, you notice all of those words I just used ended with ly, and that doesn't make them adverbs, but it gives me a good indication that it is an adverb. So write an adverb down that ends. So write an adverb down that tells how whatever verb it is done. So like number 1, run how. Now, you're going to have to come up with your own adverb, and you're all probably going to come up with different adverbs, but I still want to see you be creative and you come up with your own adverbs for these. So carrying on from today, we'll continue going into adverbs a little bit more. If you don't understand something about adjectives, or something doesn't make sense to you, or you have a question about adverbs, please drop it down in the RenWeb comment section, so maybe we can get a little bit of a discussion running about adverbs, because you will be seeing adverbs on your next test.